Hi, my name is Joanna Watamina,
I'm Giovanni Cervantes.
and our presentation is on constructivism.
All right, so what is constructivism? So constructivism is theory in education that states a learner constructs new understanding and knowledge integrating with what they already know. And the second definition of that, which could help, it's interactive teaching strategies to create meaningful context that help students construct knowledge based on their own experiences. So what I understand from constructivism, it's mostly hands-on. That's at least the main part, is like hands-on learning. And that's what works, at least for me, like visual, like seeing the thing or doing the practicing the whatever you're trying to learn. So that's that's the main definition. And then I just put a third bullet point there, all kinds of knowledge, even the one acquired before entering school. So whatever you've learned up to now, if you learned 1+1 is 2, and then you get to calculus and you somehow use that knowledge to learn calculus or whatever. And there's a nice quote from Galileo, which has nothing to do with constructivism, but his quote can be related to that. And it's, you cannot teach a man anything, you can only help him find it within himself. All right, so let's talk about the background and history. Constructivism can be tracked back to educational psychology in the work of Jean Piaget. So we've talked about him a lot in our lectures in EDU. And so Piaget, from 1896 to 1880, identified with Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So this is pretty much this slide. This slide is pretty much copy paste from Miss Professor Drake, because she really explained it really well. And he was born and raised in Switzerland, studied zoology, and had a PhD in philosophy. Believed the human capacity to think and learn was an adaptive feature. His research goal, how does knowledge grow, impacted fields like psychology, sociology, education, that word, economics, and law, and was awarded numerous prizes and honorable degrees all over the world. And that's a picture of him. And then relative theories. So the three chief theories among cognitive constructivism, which are viewed as like the main dudes, was John Dewey, John Piaget, which we just talked about, and Jerome Bruner. I don't know how you say his name. And the major theories among the social constructivists is Lev Vygotsky. And there's a little fun fact for you guys. Did you know, a common misunderstanding regarding constructivism is that instructors should never tell students anything directly, but instead should always allow them to construct knowledge for themselves. This is actually confusing a theory of pedagogy, teaching, with a theory of knowing. Constructivism assumes that all knowledge is constructed from the learner's previous knowledge, regardless of how one is taught. Thus, even listening to a lecture involves active attempts to construct new knowledge. If you think about it, when you're being taught something you have no idea about, I mean, you can technically say you know the language. So it's something you already know, or there's so many examples for that, but pretty much everything that you start learning as constructivism, anything you learn can be considered constructivism, because you need to know something to get to that point of learning more, if that makes sense. And then, so let's talk about Lev Vygotsky. So he was a distinguished Russian researcher. He was actually on our reading for Smith's learning towards the end. And here's a quote: "Anything children can do with help today, they will be able to do by themselves tomorrow." So let's just go with like something really simple. When a little kid is learning to get potty trained, I mean, he's gonna learn how to be potty trained the rest of his life. And then another one is developed a circle explaining everything we can and can't do with and without help, which is this little circle right here. And it's the outer circle, the outer part of the circle is things the learner cannot do. So whatever you haven't learned or whatever, like obviously you can do. And the middle circle is things the learner can do with help. So I would say those are most of our classes right now. Like we're learning them, and we can do most of the work, but obviously we need help doing that. And then the middle of the circle is things the learner can do on his own. So everything that you can do, like that's the inner circle. And then the main types of constructivism are, so it's a continuum and is divided into three broad categories. So cognitive constructivism, typically associated with information processing and its reliance on the component process of cognition. And the second one is social constructivism, a social group constructing things for one another, collaboratively creating a small culture of shared artifacts with shared meanings. And the third one is radical constructivism. Knowledge acquisition is an adaptive process that results from active cognizing by the individual learner. And we're gonna see a 1-minute video here. So all those are examples of constructivism learning. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, like I learn by visuals, watching movie, going on field trips, seeing the actual work being done or whatever you're learning about, like there physically touching it, manipulating. So yeah, I'm gonna pass you over to my partner.
Okay, so as it relates to teaching, a constructivist approach to teaching looks to center teaching around student-led models rather than passive learning, sitting down, absorbing things from the teacher's words, I guess. And then what I was reminded of is utilizing the same approach as a learn, do, teach, where the instructor ensures the student's knowledge, making sure they already know the different concepts that they're learning about, but rather than teaching them the activity and telling them this is how you do it, it's more of guiding them through the activity based on the knowledge that they already have. And then the role of the teacher is to create a collaborative learning space that encourages problem solving in an environment where the student becomes active participants. So the teacher is more on the sideline, I guess, of the learning process rather than the one being the teacher, I guess, in terms of building on concepts that are already there. And then I created a table here looking at the traditional classroom setup versus a constructivist centered classroom setup. And in the traditional classroom, there is an adherence to a fixed curriculum, learning these are the concepts we're going to learn today, and sticking to that. And in a constructivist classroom, student questions and interests are greatly valued. So active participation from the students to ask questions or do the activities themselves. And then in a traditional classroom, learning is repetition. So basically memorizing certain things based on the amount of times that you've become exposed to it. And constructivism, it looks to be interactive and builds on the knowledge that they already have. So like I said, more question asking, more of the student being more active in their participation. And then in a traditional classroom, the teacher is the center of the learning process. And in constructivist centered learning, the student is the center. And students are recipients of knowledge and teachers disseminate information to students. So this is more of like that passive, the teachers will just talk and talk and talk or lecture, and the students will receive that, do what they need to do. However, in a constructivist classroom, the students are the ones that are building the knowledge or building the material based on a certain set of concepts. And this is where they can work in groups, work in doing things alongside the teacher rather than the teacher spewing information at them. And then in a traditional classroom, teachers are directed or directive rooted in authority. I think I typed that a little bit wrong, but the teacher is more of the superior and then students are underneath. But in constructivism, teachers and students are about the same as they collaborate and work on finding information that works to build on what they already learned. And then in the traditional setting, students work alone, and constructivism, students work collaboratively or in groups. And as you saw in the video that was shown earlier, that's where that whole group work workshops come into play. And then some of the goals of constructivism is to provide experience with the knowledge construction process, and students determine how they will learn, to provide experience in and appreciation for multiple perspectives. This is a lot of on the lines of the student group work, learning from other individuals what they've gathered from the information that was given to them. And then to embed learning in realistic contexts, to encourage ownership and a voice in the learning process. This is really where students can kind of find their voice among other students and find what they really know in comparison to others, and kind of let like the shy, the people who don't really want to talk, allow them to find a voice in their learning process. And then to embed learning in a social experiment or experience, to encourage the use of multiple nodes of representation, and then to encourage awareness of knowledge, of the knowledge construction process. So this is like active reflection, looking back on things, looking at what you were given in terms of information, and then seeing what you can build on top of there. And here I've attached a picture of the different kinds of learning: constructivism, active learning, and whole class teaching. And here in this picture specifically, constructivism relies on the learner and to select and transform information and build hypotheses in order to make decisions and ultimately construct meaning from it. And then I have some strengths and limitations that come with constructivist teaching. So some of the strengths that come with it is that it encourages personal agency of learning, which is where we were talking about letting students find their voice in their active learning processes. And then it allows students to take ownership of their learning and assessment, and then encourages student interactions within each other and socialization, which is like learning in groups, going on field trips, doing things in a holistic setting rather than individually learning. And then some of the limitations is that there's a lack of structure because it is so student-based and based upon what the students have learned. There's not the strict curriculum that you see with the traditional setting. And if students thrive on highly structured settings and organized learning methods, then this style of learning does not necessarily cater to them, but isn't necessarily the worst, I think. But it also removes grading in the traditional sense, rather than teachers being like, okay, this is a rubric, like this is what they don't know. And the students kind of evaluate their own progress based on, okay, this is what we know, how can we build upon that? And then if there's a lack of that standardization, students can fall behind, and that standardization, like I said, is unclear. And then here is the homework that, oh, I think I missed a slide. Okay, yeah, so constructivism and childhood development. So here I have the different levels or different ages of childhood development. I have birth to 2 years old. And what I thought would be a good idea was using toys as tools, because you can't unnecessarily expect them to understand things at a conceptual level yet. So using toys, I thought of the example of holding two toys, like a red block and a blue ball, and then asking the child which one is which. And then for toddlers, using the same kind of thing, using visuals to stimulate conversation between them. And then in preschool, you can, for example, you can write or read aloud a story and ask the toddlers questions that relate to the context of the story. I think this is kind of based on the video. Storytelling might be a good method for this age group, because they are a little bit older than birth to 2 years old and toddlers, but they have yet to understand things on a conceptual large scale. And then with school age children, this is a good age group to utilize field trips and using specific concepts in class, challenging the students to create graphics based on the concepts. So this is looking at this is what we already know, like how can you gather all the information to put it into one cohesive thing. And then with teenagers, you can develop time throughout the day to encourage thought stimulation. I thought of creating a writing lab where the students write down concepts that they've learned throughout the day and sharing them with classmates. This is the group collaboration thing. And then creating a free space for students to teach each other concepts and writing out their own learning objectives for test units. And that also goes along with the homework. So we said to pick 2 chapters from the Smith reading, and it can be derived from past chapters and from past assignments or future assignments, and then create 4 to 6 objectives using the chapter that you chose, using Bloom's taxonomy of verbs that I attached as a picture there on the side, looking at the different levels of understanding, recollection versus producing your own work. And I think that in constructivism, using analyze and up utilizes the most of constructivism as a whole theory. And then post these objectives on the discussion board where you'll based on the chapters that you chose, and then respond to 2 of your classmates' objectives and work to understand the material from there. Thanks for listening to our presentation. Hope you learned a lot about constructivism. Thanks.
Thank you.